My daughter, Vanessa, is a documentary filmmaker, so I asked her, to help me put the video together. You know what she said? Well, why don't you just get a chameleon and let it crawl across the screen?
You're a very inspirational person.
Jane Fonda! Looks like you've gotten yourself in a spot of trouble.
Who steps out onto the world stage as a famous actress, comes from one of the ruling class families in Hollywood, and makes a political decision to change sides.
I'm a national security risk?
She needs to go down in history for what she is, the traitor. Jane the traitor.
A person who has taken a stand on issues that at times were unpopular and was willing to stand up and be counted. Called a radical, and it's a funny thing how people who were called radicals at the time now are considered people who, a lot of them, who were right on.
They think I'm wonderful. Back in 1980, in that movie, we refused to be controlled by a sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot.
You ready?
I wake up ready. Oh, God. We don't look a day over 350.
Discover new age-perfect Pro-Calcium Night.
We're worth it.
Jane Fonda's workout. It's an exercise program for very elderly people.
And this is it. Woo! Get ready to work out.
Hello lovelies, welcome back to my channel. As you can tell from the intro, we are doing our monthly series and today we're focusing on Jane Fonda. My first introduction to Jane was actually from L'Oreal anti-aging adverts, which I have a lot of issues with L'Oreal, which was why I've made 2 videos on them, 3 if you count the parent company's one. And then I learned of her workout videos and her impact on the health movement of the 1980s, which really was just fat shaming in disguise. I mean, let's be real, though it wasn't done for those reasons for her, as we will be talking about, of course. When people said that she was a feminist, I was really confused because the only way that I'd actually seen her was selling people products to actually market off their insecurities. It's the only way that I'd seen her. And then I saw shots of her in Barbarella, and so I knew that she was like one of the old school beauties from like the 1960s, which inspired this, by the way. Then I saw her in Monster-in-Law, which is an underrated, like, hilarious movie from the 2000s. If you ever need to pick me up, go watch that.
So pleased that you're gonna be my daughter-in-law. Yeah.
Then I learned about her and I became utterly fascinated by this woman. But it's almost kind of wild to me that this is all by the same woman of almost walking contradictions, who was born into privilege, fits the perfect mold of American beauty, but was also a radical lefty who the whole of America hated for her anti-war efforts. The videos that I make in this series do not talk about people's every little achievement in life, everything that they ate for breakfast. No, like, you can go read her Wikipedia page or something. We're on about the broader themes, the impacts that she's had, the ripple effects from it, and her influence on things, because Jane Fonda is actually one of the most influential women of our time. Genuinely, she really is. And since she worked with Dolly, who I've also made a video on, it's very fascinating the fact that they've crossed paths so many times in life and remained friends and worked together, as we will be talking about. I've got a lot of admiration for this woman, and I think you'll get some hope, comfort and bravery from watching this. At least that's my hope for you, despite some definite sadness that's in here. So let's get to the trigger warnings. War, obviously, the Vietnam War, and racism subsequently from that. Rape and sexual abuse, bulimia and anorexia, addiction, sycamore, and also self-harm. So if those are sensitive topics, I don't dive too deep into anything here, but I do talk about them, and it is mentioned quite early on because her childhood was very traumatic. So I just want you to be prepared, because obviously, whilst I don't want anyone's day to be ruined after watching one of my videos, I also want you to actually, know what you're going into. So let's get started with her childhood.
The messages I received growing up was, if you're not perfect, you won't be loved. And while I've overcome that maybe 85%, that lingers. I do worry about how I look too much, I think.
Now, her childhood wasn't actually a happy one at all. Her father, Henry Fonda, was a very famous actor, like world-class, very well-renowned actor. And her mother was the socialite Frances Ford Seymour. She was definitely of the socialite class. They both were very much upper crust, Americana, everything. But her mother was not only unhappy, but also suffered from a number of mental health issues and got institutionalized a lot. And she actually unalived herself when Jane was actually 12. But her father told her that it was from a heart attack and got everyone around her to actually lie. It was only later on, when she was actually reading a movie magazine, that Jane found out the truth about what happened to her mother. And not even that, when she found out, she didn't really even know how to react, because emotions in the Henry Fonda household were not a done thing.
I'll never forget her face. And you know, she was remarkable even then. She did not say a word.
She was also sexually abused when she was 8, which again is why therapy is so very important and explains a lot of the work that she's done, which we'll be getting to with her activism.
8, yes, and I did not realize it until it's too long and complicated to go into. But what happens very often, and is that we shut it down, we blank it out. I could only remember up to a certain point, and then I had no idea, and I had to go into therapy.
Henry actually married again just a few months after the passing of Jane's mother to Susan Blanchard, who was closer in age to Jane than she was to him. Mind you, Jane was like 12 to 13 at this time. Henry was an imposing but absent father in her life and kept on telling her to lose weight, which obviously contributed to the ED she suffered from for decades. But he also didn't praise her. In fact, he said that she disgusted him anytime that she showed any emotion or would cry. Reason being, that's not what a man wants from a woman. Yeah, I mean, talk about awful messaging to grow up with. It was his roles in movies like 12 Angry Men, which I can attest is a fantastic movie, that helped to inspire her to become an activist, because she saw value in the roles that he played and she wanted him to see value in her. So much so that later in life she specifically wanted to make the movie On Golden Pond with him, and coincidentally Katharine Hepburn, amazing, as it was basically about their exact strained relationship. And she speaks of this in quite a few of her interviews and in her most known autobiographical book, My Life So Far.
Put yourself in my shoes. A daughter who absolutely worshipped her father, who never expressed emotion, he didn't, who never verbalized any love or affection, who was extremely repressed, and I get to produce a movie and act with him. And in that movie, I get to say to him things that I was never able to say in life. And in the movie, we reconcile. And in this movie that I produced for him, he ends up winning an Oscar.
Very last, when I said, I want to be your friend, I reached out and I touched his arm. And I could see him seize up. I could see tears begin in his eyes, and then he ducked his head and turned away, but I saw.
She was working on trying to actually accept herself, and she stresses this in a lot of her interviews, that you have to go back to look at the lives of your parents or caregivers, and when you do that, then you realize that they were actually struggling too. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable, they had issues, she says, and the minute that you know that, you can feel tremendous empathy for them and you can forgive. Now this is a very noble mentality to have, but please do not go blaming yourself if you don't feel that way, if you've had a really toxic, awful relationship with your parents, because the thing is that Jane has got all of the wealth in the world to be able to get all of the therapy that she needed, and plus she only reached this point when she was about 60 years old. So don't go beating yourself up if you are still in that stage of like you can't face into it yet, because everyone's different, everyone's growth journeys are different, and it's another reason why I say that therapy should be free and accessible to everybody.
He would complain if I wore a belt that was too tight, or a bathing suit that was too small, or a shirt that was too short. He realized how objectified I was. He objectified me. He didn't mean to. He wasn't a bad person. It was just the way he was brought up, I guess.
When she was 13, she really started to hate the way that she looked, and the bulimia started along with her addiction to dexedrine, which is an ADHD medication which acts as a stimulant and an amphetamine, which continued until she was in her 40s. She never even wanted to be an actor, but her friend, coincidentally Lee Strasberg's daughter, just casually, wanted her to go and perform for Lee, and people all around gathered to watch her do this performance.
Nobody had ever told me I was particularly good at anything. So when Lee Strasberg said, I see a lot of people come through here and you have real talent, I really felt like the top of my head came off and birds flew out and the color of the sky changed. And when I walked down onto Broadway after that class, I felt like I owned the city. It was amazing. I was transformed immediately.
If you know anything about Lee Strasberg, if you get his seal of approval, you can pretty much do anything when it comes to acting. And she's proven that time and again because she's won quite a few awards. And if you haven't seen Be Kind Rewind's videos on Jane Fonda, I'll have those videos down below. I love their channel so much. Feminism.
Started thinking about all of the women that are killed by the misplaced rage of men within a patriarchy. I didn't think of that word, did not come into my head, but now I look back on it. And as I was thinking of that and crying for those women, I realized this is feminism coming alive within me. And I will never be the same, and my acting will never be the same.
I didn't need a man to validate who I was. It took me 62 years. Never give up.
She actually distanced herself from the term feminism for the longest time. I did the same thing because I thought it was just about male bashing, and it's not that at all. It's actually about creating equality. The opposite to patriarchy is democracy, as she will tell you.
We're not saying patriarchy has to be replaced with matriarchy. It has to be replaced with democracy. The antithesis of democracy is patriarchy. How can it be democracy when the majority of human beings on Earth are less than?
The thing is that the patriarchy actually hinders all genders, not just women, and this is something that I've watched in so many of her interviews. She goes on to talk about this, and there has been a lot of work in this area that friends that she's made have actually done. It's really fascinating. I'll have some of them linked down below for you.
Patriarchy takes aim at girls' voices, but it takes aim at boys' hearts.
From the way that her father raised her, she wanted to please men at all costs. And it was only once she got into activism that she had this sort of awakening in her to be able to see the real atrocities in the world, because of course she grew up pretty privileged and quite sheltered when you really think about it. But it was in her first husband, Roger Vadim? I just watched her say it again.
Roger Vadim. I wanted him to teach me how to be a woman.
So
he taught me to be a female impersonator.
That she really fell into the whole be what men want sort of mentality. He was against the bourgeoisie and loved beautiful women. He was previously with Brigitte Bardot and Catherine Deneuve, and look at how Jane kind of transformed herself to be sort of like a carbon copy of that. And despite them being married, he wanted to have an open relationship, which she went along with even though she didn't want to, and he would just bring women home and just expect her to accept it. And after she shot Barbarella, something which she really struggled to do, by the way, because of her body dysmorphia, it meant that she hated seeing herself naked or anything, so she had to get completely blottoed on vodka to be able to film the opening scene, but then had to do it twice because of a bat. It was only after that she found her own voice, and her voice even deepened.
They tend to sort of bifurcate and their real self moves outside because, God forbid, all the things that are interesting about us, the anger, the complexities, the things you think men won't like. I wanted to please men at all costs. And so your voice isn't reflecting who you really are. It goes very high in your head. This is very common.
Her second husband, Tom Hayden, was a huge part of her activism, and she still keeps him close to her heart. But as she points out in this People interview, at the start of their relationship, she wasn't getting many career opportunities due to being greylisted, due to an incident we'll be talking about soon. And because of that, she was with him all the time. But then as work picked up, she got involved in more things. She obviously gained more independence and got a bit more distance from him, which he didn't like at all. She started her workout series to fund their political action committee that they created, but he couldn't handle this. She left him because he fell in love with someone else, but she was actually glad for it because she loved him so much that she wouldn't have left. Sparked by her activism, we'll get into it, don't worry, she went on to co-produce a number of movies with this particular emphasis on wanting to view things from the female mind and have a female center to things and actually make movies that were popular but had a core message to them. She's the person behind 9 to 5.
Dark comedy. Then I saw Lily Tomlin in a one-woman show downtown at the Amundsen Theater. I was smitten. She just blew me away. I had never seen that kind of talent. And I said to myself, I'm not going to make a movie about secretaries unless Lily Tomlin is one of them. And driving home from the theater, I turned on the radio, and Dolly Parton was singing Two Doors Down, and I thought, Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be something?
And oh my gosh, if you ever need a pick-me-up, by the way, just watch an interview with Lily and Jane in it, because you will just, their friendship is infectious. It just makes you feel good.
Jane Fonda. Eat for breakfast. My boyfriend, well toasted, buttered on both sides.
She doesn't have a boyfriend.
Shush. I'm fantasizing.
All of this created movies like Coming Home, Julia, The China Syndrome, On Golden Pond, and she obviously made other movies then too. But she left movie making when she married her third husband, Ted Turner, the media mogul who created and owned CNN, who actually pursued her as soon as the divorce was announced, and she said, please just give me 3 months. And he called her back like 3 months exactly afterwards. Man knew what he wanted. He wanted her to be what he wanted her to be. So she basically gave up work for the entirety of their marriage, obviously still being involved in some charity work. She took over the Turner Foundation and she worked on issues of population control, children's health, adolescent reproductive health and sexuality. She started the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Pregnancy Program, but she left him in 2001.
You're going to lose a great love if you don't give up a career. I was planning to do it anyway, so it was partly Ted and partly something I wanted to do.
Personally, I've never fallen for the patriarchy, as I must say some of my sisters have done.
Totally. I admit it. Mea culpa.
I'm just pulling her leg.
She said mea culpa.
Oh, she does.
Yeah,
she does.
No, I've, you know.
She had heterosexual damage.
Fitness. I had to make this an entirely separate section just because it deserves it, honestly, because Jane, trailblazer and trendsetter galore. In her 40s, she actually broke her foot on the set of The China Syndrome, meaning that she couldn't do her normal ballet exercises, because she did ballet. That was one of the ways in which she stayed fit. But the thing is that she had a bikini scene coming up in her next movie, California Suite, and so in her words, she had to do something, because obviously body dysmorphia is not something that is easy to beat. So after attending a bunch of Lenny Carson classes and being encouraged by a number of people around her, in particular this one guy that did home improvement videos on VHS, she started to actually film her own and do her own workouts in 1982 and sell them to fund the Campaign for Economic Democracy, a political action committee that she and her husband Tom Hayden had set up. That's husband number 2, by the way. She found empowerment from exercise and being able to move her body in different ways and build strength, which was not the done thing back then.
Back then, if a woman went to a health club, there'd be a gym for men and nothing for women. We were not supposed to be strong and fit.
And this spread that empowerment to millions of women and everyone, really. All of the YouTube fitness people really do owe her a lot, and she had this specific vision of wanting to make sure that there was true diversity in those workout classes. She wanted people of all races, ages and ethnicity, and also gender. So she wanted to have men and women there. And I did one of her classes for this video. It's like being recruited into a spandex cult. I can't describe it any other way. But obviously there's a lot of issues with the 80s diet culture. I mean, heck, every decade has a different one. But over-exercising was the way to do it in the 80s. It was seen as a way to be strong as opposed to the starved waif of the 1960s. However, the Diet Coke decade that it was, which coincidentally got launched in 1982, specifically targeted at women, the same year that this workout came out, it wasn't really that positive. Now, working out is great. It's a fantastic mood booster, has a number of health benefits, but a lot of the focus then really was on having the perfect body and losing weight and getting in shape and all this other stuff about conforming to the ideal body type, which back then was very svelte. Very, very much so. But that does say a lot more internalized sexism, as Jane would tell you herself, rather than her trying to make people feel bad on purpose.
What the workout, because I was doing the workout before I started the business, it gave me back a sense of control over my body. And so that, you know, the longer space time you put between yourself and the addiction, the easier it gets. I had body issues all my life, and I started the workout never expecting that it would become what it did. And so now everybody knows about it, but I basically was like just a lot of you. I was just trying to look good. You know, and then I became famous for it. And discovered it was much more than just looking good, that it actually empowers you if you become strong.
It helped her to beat her ED that she had been plagued with for most of her life. Activism.
Culturally, psychologically, economically, politically,
that gays and lesbians are discriminated against. They are a very powerful movement, especially in San Francisco. They don't need me, but they like me because, and they like our organization, the Campaign for Economic Democracy, because they know that working together we can be stronger than either entity is by itself. So it's really healthy that we try to bring these things together.
Are they using you, or are you using for your economic democratic campaign?
I hope they use me. What am I here for if not to be used by good people for good things?
For me, the thing that makes her stand out the most is her activism and range of causes that she supports.
The fact that those of us who do speak up about things we believe in, about the war in Vietnam, about the fact that a lot of people's rights are being taken away from them, that people don't have a way to speak up and defend themselves, that when one tries to say these things, to voice a protest, you get shut up, you get put in jail, or you get arrested, or you get thrown off army bases.
Watching a number of interviews, as I always do, even in her earlier ones, you can really see that she went on this swift learning journey. And the thing is that she recognizes and points out her privilege in those interviews way back in the 60s and 70s.
Are the police down there, are they fed up with you leading these protests?
They actually, you know, look, I'm white. And I'm famous, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what happens to me is different than what would happen if I was a person of color.
And the thing is that she always reflected it back to the people that were actually doing the work, the people actually on the ground. She was okay, and still is okay, to admit when she doesn't know something fully, and so she'll refer people to a book, to a person, and bring them on the interviews with her. She really wanted to be on the ground with the people, which is something she still does today. To list all of the things that she's directly been involved with every single little campaign would take the entire video, so I will just talk about kind of like umbrella terms a lot. Anti-war movement, the occupation of Alcatraz Island by Native Americans. She opposed the Iraq War, is a staunch environmentalist, but isn't a vegan, she'll tell you that. Feminism, she stood up against oil pipelines running through Native American ground. She supported the Black Panthers and actually adopted Mary Williams unofficially.
I ended up adopting one of the girls, an African-American girl named Lulu. To live with us, I said to her one day, "Lulu, why was the camp such an important experience to you?" And she thought for the briefest minute, and she said, "It was the first time in my life that I had ever met people who thought about the future." That was a transforming statement for me. As usual, I learned, and the counselors learned more from the campers, I'm sure, than they did.
She's the daughter of Randy and Mary Williams, who are Black Panthers. Honestly, the woman has done so much and continues to do so to this day, despite being nearly 85. However, you know how I mentioned that she's a staunch environmentalist? I do take issue with this because this has just happened. She is the ambassador for H&M, the fast fashion company that is like causing huge environmental damage. So she really is a lot of contradictions. I understand that everyone's human, but it's like she should know this because H&M have like got all these wonderful words and they say that they're going to be carbon zero by 2030 or some other BS. Honestly, if you want a video about this exact scenario, I'm happy to do it because I've written a lot about this and I'm not going to go on. But capitalism doesn't want a true circular economy. All that H&M is doing right now is greenwashing. Let me know, comment down below if you want a rant video about that and for me to actually debunk it, because I'm very happy to. Now, even these days, she does get handcuffed, looking very glamorous, by the way. She's been arrested formally 6 times, mind you. She gets escorted off from her fire drill Fridays. She recognizes that she's effectively a PR stunt at this point for them, but that doesn't mean that she's not dedicated to the causes she supports. When you say Jane Fonda the activist, there's normally 2 images that crop up in people's minds. And from reading a bunch of comments on her interview videos, because I always make sure to do that, there are 2 very different outlooks on her depending on which side of the boat you're on. Now, if you think of this mugshot, which was taken in 1970 where she was arrested in Cleveland, Ohio, she was raising money for the Winter Soldier Project. The object of the Winter Soldier was to take the all too available atrocity stories coming out of Vietnam and show their direct relationship to American policies, which of course we will be diving into a bit more. And so for doing that, she flew from Canada to Cleveland. The police pulled her aside and pulled out of her luggage some pills and like some small bags, which she said were vitamins. However, they had direct orders from Nixon to arrest her. The reason that she's able to hold up her fist like this as a sign of resistance is because she's double jointed, by the way, so she just managed to shimmy her way out and show this sign of resistance. Oh, and those were vitamin pills, by the way. Nixon really hated her. And to this day, she proudly says that the FBI has 20,000 pages on her. Like, she had government agents coming into her home in disguise, like all sorts of personal information divulged from her. Like, she got put through a lot.
And it's pretty terrifying to see. I've never broken the law, and yet there were undercover agents coming into my home disguised as, I don't know, one woman said she was an active feminist journalist who came to interview me because she admired me, and when I read my CIA and FBI file, I discovered she was really there to find out when I was going to give birth to my son.
But that doesn't mean that America has completely forgiven her for this image. When you see this image, this is what got her the nickname Hanoi Jane, which we will be talking about further, where she's sitting in an aircraft shooter which was used to shoot down Americans while smiling and clapping, which we should really unpack now. Now, before we can even go further, I need to give you context about the Vietnam War. I am no history channel, but there are all the links that you could possibly need in the description box down below in a separate section so that you can go find that. The scarier thing is the fact that the amount of misinformation about the war and the politics around it are still rife today.
I understand when people insult me. It is hard to hear the true facts, and we're being lied to, and I deeply resent, as most Americans do, we have found, you know, from policemen to working people to housewives to everybody. When they find out that we're being lied to, they get angry.
And I've done as I always do and made sure to stick to verifiable sources and people who are and were actually on the ground, in this case the Vietnamese and the war veterans. There's a documentary FTA which Jane was involved in the making of, which I wasn't able to find all of online, and Jane also recommended in one of her interviews to watch Sir No Sir, a documentary about the GI's effort against the Vietnam War. I watched it, it's genuinely really good and shows just how much power genuinely lies with the people. The issue really comes down to the revisionist history which I kept stumbling across when looking into it. Like, that's where the true problem lies. But we're going to stick to the key points here and Jane's involvement. So, in a nutshell, the war started because France wanted to keep its colonial power over Vietnam, previously called Indochina, but communism was on the rise, and we know how much America loves to invade countries which are breaking away from capitalism. The French had actually alienated people all over Vietnam, which is the thing that drove people to the Communist Party. Now, this is directly from an article from The Guardian which spent a month on the ground with the Vietnamese people who lived through the war. I highly recommend you read that. It will be a highlighted link down below. In 1954, in spite of the victory of the Vietnamese army, France and its Western allies hung on to power in their southern stronghold. At an international convention in Geneva, all sides agreed that the country should be divided temporarily into South Vietnam and North Vietnam until July 1956, when an election would deliver a new government for the nation as a whole. The US President Dwight Eisenhower later admitted that if the election had been allowed to take place, some 80% of the Vietnamese people would have voted for men in the new socialist society. And the Vietnamese that The Guardian spoke to actually concurred with this. But the US wouldn't allow it. Instead, they turned to the notorious CIA officer Edward Lansdale, who proceeded to use a dexterous combination of bribes and violence to install a new government in Saigon, headed by the Catholic politician Ngo Dinh Diem. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. He was autocratic and nepotistic, but anti-communist and pro-American, the two most important things, obviously. In October of 1955, Lansdale rigged an election in the South to make Diem president. The national elections were cancelled. The quote-unquote temporary division now became a prolonged pretense that Vietnam was actually two different countries. The South is a passive victim of the invasion from the North. By the time the war was over, the number of dead was beyond counting, possibly as high as 3.8 million, according to a study by the Harvard Medical School and the University of Washington. The US dropped more high explosives on the tiny country of Vietnam than the Allies used on Germany and Japan together throughout the entire duration of the Second World War. It also dropped napalm jelly, which stuck to its victims whilst it roasted their skin, and infamously Agent Orange, which killed vegetation and inflicted illness on anyone exposed to it. Not only all of that, but the US actually punished Vietnam repeatedly after the US lost the war with embargoes. They refused to pay them billions of dollars for the impact the USA had on the people of Vietnam, which they actually publicly promised to do, by the way, but they reneged on this. You know, the reason that they were actually meant to be paying all of this money was for the use of things like Agent Orange, which wiped out huge swaths of land from being able to be farmed. And the US actually had the audacity to demand the quote-unquote new Vietnam to repay the quote-unquote old debts from old Vietnam, which was a few $100 million. And what the US actually did, along with their allies, was cut Vietnam off completely from getting aid after the war. This was as punishment until they actually went for a capitalist regime, which forced people to starve to death. It's wild and honestly should be an entire video in itself. I'm only giving you the tiniest of cliff notes here.
The problem I had was realizing that what I was doing was not good. Because they didn't want to believe that these things occurred in the name of the American people, supposedly supporting freedom and liberation and democracy throughout the world. And there was this terrible slaughter, this terrible, inane slaughter. So I think the question was, why are they going after Cali, where Cali was doing precisely what we were all told to do when we were in Vietnam, essentially, okay? Which is kill them all and sort it out later.
And they go out on ambushes. Like for a 1 month period, we go out on ambushes and we go for 50 people, you know, in the early hours of the morning, and you start looking at bodies because they've got to get their body count. And who's there? Well, the majority were women and children. And what were they doing? What was their crime? They were carrying food.
Coming home saying I'm against the war. You're saying this is what we did. This is how we did it. This was a crime. This was wrong. Helped people to really cross the bridge and to see us in a way that I think the anti-war movement had not seen GIs before.
And I really appreciate the fact that Jane went to the GIs directly and was working with them, as opposed to the anti-war movement, which was mostly done by middle class, upper class, like rich white people. She was like, I don't want to do that. I want to be on the ground and know what's really happening. And so that's what she genuinely did. And that's the thing that sets her apart, and it's something that she does time and time again. And the thing is that she supports the GIs and has a huge compassion for them, and just shows how much the US didn't care about them at all. And I mean, heck, we've just seen this happen with Jon Stewart having to constantly try and use his platform to get, because of the fire pits, that's what's just passed now, finally, after years of fighting for it. That's only just passed now. It's blatantly just exploitation of the people for this whole fight for your country thing, when the country's not actually doing anything to help you. That's what I've got a huge problem with. Now, on Jane's visit to Vietnam, so it was in 1972 she visited there on a 2-week tour to witness the bombing and damage to the dikes, which flooded parts of the country. Now, she actually did expose a lot by doing this. She went on Hanoi radio describing her visits to the villages, hospitals, schools and factories that had been bombed, and denouncing the US military policy. She visited prisoners of war and took messages from their family to them. And on her last day, even though she did say that she wouldn't do this, this was not part of the plan, but because she was traveling alone and she was actually having these connections with people, they wanted to sing some songs with her, and so they were singing some of their national songs, and she'd learnt a traditional Vietnamese song for them, and they were singing and clapping and having this wonderful good time. And that was when she actually got led to this infamous photo with the gun. To quote this article from the LA Times, carried away by singing a song she'd memorized for the Vietnamese people, Fonda found herself in the seat of a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun without really knowing, she writes, how she got there. I hardly even think about where I'm sitting, she writes. Cameras flash and the rest is history. I realize that it's not just a US citizen laughing and clapping on the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. I'm Henry Fonda's privileged daughter who appeared to be thumbing my nose to the country that had provided me with these privileges. More than that, I'm a woman, which makes my sitting here even more of a betrayal. Now, she had to do a lot of damage control after this. And I mean a lot. Like, she still to this day has to make apologies for what happened there. She's made apologies, not only heaps at the time, but then also annually, having to denounce this particular thing that she did. While she doesn't denounce all of the work that she did, and she shouldn't, because what she was doing was actually good, it's just this incident has made her kind of public enemy #1 to a number of people on the internet, and I'm sure that there's going to be some comments from people that hate her still to this day in my comment section. So all of this got her greylisted. While she could still get roles, the resentment was strong. She was the all-American girl who betrayed the country. She changed her looks to be softer, and the movie Coming Home was something that she really wanted to make after spending all this time with the GIs and their wives. This was a bit of a redemption for her. Coming Home is her second movie that got her an Oscar, but her husband, Tom Hayden, didn't think that it was political enough. And actually also in that speech she did sign language, because after spending so much time with the GIs and their wives, a lot of them actually had disabilities because of their combat, because of the work that they'd done for the government, for the people that can't sort out their own problems. She had actually asked the Academy if they could have captions on the bottom of the screen so that everyone could actually participate in it, and they refused, so that's why she's signing part of her speech here, which is amazing. Like, people were laughing at her to begin with, and then as soon as she said what it was, they were like, oh, yeah. Love. Now, love is a huge part of people's lives, but for Jane it's been something which has not been the easiest for her, as she will tell basically anyone. She says that she's not cut out for it.
I just wasn't dealt a hand that made me good at relationships.
Like, the thing is that she always sort of felt like she was being made into a pretzel and just molding herself to be whatever the man in her life wanted her to be.
Well, this disease to please, which it doesn't just go away, it continues on into your relationships. He is a man who didn't like it when I was focused on something other than him.
Obviously isn't really being true and authentic to herself and whole in herself.
Two whole people coming together and maintaining their agency, their strength, while at the same time caring for the other, nurturing the other, cherishing the other, but never losing themselves.
Like, she's given up on love now, but it was really in her 70s that she realized it was the different kinds of love that can really give you so much more fulfillment, along with the activism work that she does. One thing which gets said all the time about Jane Fonda is how amazing she looks for her age. Oh my goodness, I can't believe she's that old. Now, when I was watching Grace and Frankie, because I also watched that for this, and she turned 80, I didn't realize that that was how old she was. I thought she was like maybe approaching 70, because she does not look like an 80-year-old at all. One thing that she really wants to do is make sure that young people aren't afraid of aging, that it really is a mentality, that it's not something to be afraid of. Now, she actually co-produced Grace and Frankie, which is an amazing, heartwarming, hilarious and poignant show. I would happily make a video on this. Do let me know if you want one, because that would be a wonderful bit of escapism for me as well. I love that show so much. But her and Lily Tomlin actually did it in order to center women who are the same age as them, because obviously if you get old in Hollywood, still to this very day, nobody wants to watch that. However, older women are a giant market that has got so much untapped potential. If you want to even just see this from like a capitalist sort of venture, there is so much money there that can be had that doesn't just need to be taken by retirement homes. Now, there is a lot of pressure on people in Hollywood to look a certain way, and it's basically forbidden to age. And for someone who struggled as much as Jane has with terrible self-image, I'm sure it was the worst environment to be in, honestly. And since we all know how much the tabloids and the news and basically everyone love to do this then and now, look and see how much your stars have let themselves go. Very frustrating with our ageist society. It's why I've done the ageism video. It's this constant thing, and if you've always had like this poor self-image like what Jane has, I'm not surprised that she's succumbed to a number of plastic surgeries, honestly, and has this sort of fear about looking old, which does get explored quite a bit with the character of Grace. Again, I would love to do a video on Grace and Frankie. But when it comes to comments about Jane Fonda, everyone's like, oh my god, she doesn't look her age, look how amazing she looks. She's 84 now. She doesn't look 84 because her face is not representative of an 84-year-old at all. It's not just good genes, sweetie.
What is Jane Fonda's beauty secret? Good genes and a lot of money.
Which I appreciate the fact that she'll actually tell people that she's had the surgeries done.
I've been very public about it. I had bags removed from under my eyes and, you know, some wattles taken out from under my chin. And I'll tell you why I did it. I feel so good. And I would walk by a store window and catch a sight of myself, and it would like, oh, who's that?
You were surprised.
Yeah, I don't feel like that person in that reflection looks like. And I decided that I wanted to look more like how I feel. And You know, if I wasn't an actress, maybe I wouldn't do it, but I wanted to get back into the business. You know, I quit the business for 15 years, 10 to be with Ted Turner and 5 to write my memoirs. And now I'm getting back into movies and I want to buy myself a little time. So I did it, and I'm not proud of it.
Now, she got asked this question at a university talk in 2006 when she was 68.
What I wonder is, with this wholesale need to do all sorts of plastic surgery, what do you think the women in this country are teaching the young women who are coming up for tomorrow?
Well, the people in Hollywood are teaching them really bad lessons. I have made the decision that I'm not going to carve up myself anymore. But I can say to myself, man, I knew Katharine Hepburn, and if she can do it, I can do it.
And as we've seen, it's actually only increased in terms of plastic surgery. It's gone up year on year, seriously, because of things like social media. She said that she's not going to get it done anymore now that she's 84, like she's completely given up and she sort of regrets her facelift. But it really is one of those things, we're not really used to seeing older people, like genuine older people who haven't gone under the knife on screen very much. You know, definitely not in a way that would be as sex positive as this.
Personal lubricant is for everybody.
And she still works with L'Oreal, which I do still have a lot of issues with. She says this in an interview in Elle magazine in 2020. Because she is appearing as a proud spokesperson for L'Oreal Paris Age Perfect. They chose me not in spite of my age, but because of my age. They are committed to the idea that beauty is not simply in the young and model perfect, but in all people regardless of ethnicity or age. However, Jane doesn't look 82. At the time of that interview, she was 82. She's had multiple surgeries done. She stresses the fact that she wanted to maintain some wrinkles, but not a lot of wrinkles. And I would argue that she actually looked older in like that 2006 clip than she does now. And it's just the under the knife stuff that she's talked about, whereas there could also be a number of non-invasive procedures done. And it's just not a positive thing for her to represent over 80-year-old faces because she doesn't have that. In spirit and in her work, absolutely. In my opinion, this is wrong to market this image as something that these products can do, because obviously they can't. Genuinely they can't. This is surgery that's done this, and of course good genes and money. My issue really is with L'Oreal. It's not with Jane, it's with L'Oreal. But she does choose to work with them. She doesn't need to. Purpose and wisdom. Now, one thing from watching all of these interviews and reading them or watching the documentaries that you'll notice is just how grounded Jane is.
It's through those wounds that we can blossom. The events and the people that gave you those wounds, it had nothing to do with you. It had nothing to do with you. It was their problem. Take it from here and learn and grow from it. We can't undo the wounds. They're there, and we just let them teach us and let the wounds make us better people. And because also without the wounds, we won't have empathy. It wasn't until I was finally single at 62 that I began to feel whole, to feel that I was where I was supposed to be.
And how wise she is, brave, and her resilience, you just notice that it comes through so strongly. A year before she turned 60, she was with her third husband, you know, the CNN owner, like the very rich mogul with, what is it, 200 million acres or something she recently said? Wow. What was that about giving Native Americans back their land, Jane? Anyway, it's not her fault, it's his fault. Let's be real. She wanted to be able to look back at her life and see it through someone else's eyes and just be able to have this assessment. It's like, what would someone think of me if they read back and looked at my life? The thing is that she didn't want to have any regrets, so she went through all of the archives, and luckily she's done heaps of interviews because I've been able to find them. And she realized two things. One, that she could finally own who she was without feeling like an imposter, and two, that she actually wanted to leave her husband in order to be whole.
One is that for the first time in my life, I owned who I was. And that may seem strange because I've been successful most of my adult life on several levels. You know, I'm kind of a can-do woman. You know, you think of me in a certain way. I never owned who I was. You can die married, but you're not going to be whole. You're going to have regrets. It was terrifying. It was like it was uncharted territory for me, because I had spent all my life feeling that if I wasn't with an alpha male, that I would cease to be. And it was particularly weird because I left this man and 1.5 million acres
27 properties and a private jet. You know, the thing that many women fear, if I speak my truth, I'm going to end up alone. Except I'm not alone, I'm with myself. It's very different.
She's embarked on different career paths when she was at points in her life that people say that women are irrelevant. She's stood up to the US government time and again. She's walked away from marriages when they weren't genuine to her anymore. She's found most of her purpose actually comes from activism, and she's determined to try and make the world better. And honestly, I applaud her for repeatedly trying to do this, despite some falters and flaws in her methodology, who and what companies she decides to work with. You can't deny the fact that she's a fighter and she's trying to do the right thing.
All of the incredible civil society movements, civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, so many movements have made so much progress that the patriarchy, let's say, is a wounded beast, and there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded beast. And what we're seeing now is the flailing, the dangerous flailing of a wounded beast. It means that we've gotten stronger. And so we just need to get even more stronger just to slay it once and for all. The problem is, can we do it before the earth is done in? That's why climate is so important, because we're a race against time now.
I also love the way that she continuously builds others up. Like, when you see her in interviews, she will always name drop other people, and I love this aspect. I think that that's so important. I'm sure that she's not going to fade into the background anytime soon, and I'm very glad of that fact. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let's see, maybe leave the megaphone emoji and the martini emoji. I think that sums her up pretty well. Maybe also a high heel and a crisp white shirt. I don't own one, so this is a collared shirt, so this is formal for me. But yeah, I think these 4 emojis sum her up very well. Next week I'll be doing that video on plastic surgery because that was very popular in the polls. But yes, I really appreciate it if you made it all the way to the end. Let me know your thoughts, I'd love to hear them, and I'll see you again next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye!
Just hoping, by the way. Yeah, thank you. I'm just hoping that I'm going to get one of those Grace and Frankie vibrators in my swag bag tonight. You think that's possible?
Don't worry, it'll all come back.
Oh, it's just like riding a bicycle.
Except instead of riding a bicycle, you have sex with a man. Note to self, watch Carol ride a bicycle someday. I'll see you next time. Bravo!